Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with interesting overtures, the next in our series of fabulous curtain raisers. And today I want to talk to you about Domenico Cimarosa, a very, very interesting classical period composer. His dates were, 1749 to 1801. And here we have the Naxos recording of his Overtures, Volume 6. He wrote a lot of overtures. He wrote more than 80 operas. 60 were buffos, and 20 of them were seriosos or serias or whatever you call them. That is, 60 were funny and 20 were not. But he was enormously popular, incredibly popular. He had quite the career. He began in Naples. He was one of the Neapolitan composers and wound up in the court of Catherine the Great. And then he wound up in Vienna for Emperor Leopold. And then he went back to Naples, where he decided to back the Republicans at the time that the monarchy sort of reestablished itself. So he was thrown into prison and almost sentenced to death, but he managed to get out and wound up in Venice, where he finally passed away. He was only 52, but he wrote a ton of music. Really, really a lot of music. And his most famous opera was Il Matrimonio Segreto, The Secret Marriage, which, it was more popular than Mozart back in the day in 1792 when he wrote it. And he has been reviled. I mean reviled, crapped all over ever since by German nationalist musicologists who have never forgiven him for being more popular than Mozart. And because, of course, musicology generally was a German endeavor and its conclusions have been widely slurped up by other academics ever since, although maybe fewer now than was formerly. They're finally starting to get over it, let's put it that way. Cimarosa has been given short shrift. Now, these 6 volumes of overtures that Naxos has released are really very handy, because the overtures, like Rossini's overtures, often have very little to do with the operas to which they're attached. And so you can listen to them completely separately, and they're delightful. They are not sophisticated in the Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven classical style. They are simpler, more harmonically conservative, less formally sophisticated, but no less charming for that. They serve their purpose amply well. And what makes them so interesting to me, or what makes the one I'm going to play you so interesting to me, is the foreshadowing of Rossini. Because, you see, here's the thing. We don't really know Italian opera. Our whole history of opera, as with music generally, is skewed by the fact that we are way too stuck or hung up on the importance of the German school. And I'm not saying it wasn't important. What I'm saying is there were other schools, there were other ways of doing things. I mean, the same thing happened with French opera, which is magnificent and which is a school entirely of its own, and which has its own following. Rameau and all of those people who came later. They were an entirely separate school. And the only one who sort of bridged the gap was Gluck. And for that reason, he's not even paid attention to as much as he should be, quite frankly. But anyway, the Italian school, was, of course, was at war with the French school and the German school. And the reason, of course, was that everybody loved it. Italian singers were the most popular. Italian composers were the most popular. The language of opera was Italian. The language of music was Italian, despite everything the Germans did to try and make us forget about that fact. That was the way it was. And so the value that Cimarosa brought to music is the same value that all of us enjoyed for years and decades and hundreds of years and generations. It's simple tunefulness, vivaciousness, heartfelt emotion, everything based on vocally expressive melody. I mean, nothing could be wrong with that, right? There were other things you could do. Granted, other things you could do. But those simple, basic musical values remained paramount, and they remained paramount for everybody, including Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. So, let's not kid ourselves. So was Cimarosa a greater composer than Mozart? Hell no. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that he wrote a lot of very attractive music, and these 6 volumes of overtures give you quite a bit of it. And the nice thing about volume 6 is that you get the overture to Il Matrimonio Segreto. It's in here, which is handy. But the one I want to play you is a bit of this one. It's called Achille al assedio di Troia, Achilles at the Siege of Troy, from 1797. It's actually a tragic opera. You would never know it from the overture. The overture couldn't sound less tragic. And in that respect, it's also like a lot of Rossini's overtures. You know, the original overture to the Barber of Seville was used for, as Elizabeth, Queen of England. That was a tragedy. And Torvaldo and Dorliska, I don't know, there was another one it was used for. Don't bother to tell me which one. I don't care. I'll figure it out eventually. But this one, Achilles at the Siege of Troy, is interesting to me because it contains in its closing stages a sort of embryonic Rossini crescendo. The idea that Rossini had to make something very exciting by taking a little melodic bit and repeating it over and over and over again in a big, big crescendo. Like the one in the Barber of Seville. It does that sort of stuff. Oh, it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. And this one is really, it gives the same concept. It's rather fascinating. And this is, of course, just before Rossini got going. 1797. And, before Rossini was born. Well, it's before Rossini was Rossini. Let's put it that way, before his operas started popping up. But this is really good stuff. Really, really, really good stuff. And enjoyable. I don't know. Just listen to this and think crescendo. Once again, this is the overture to Achilles at the Siege of Troy. Hear what I mean? Wasn't that fun? Now, of course, he repeats it a little too many times because that was just the end of the overture. It's a 9-minute overture, I think. It's a big piece. And, the melodic material, you might say, yes, 9 minutes and 12 seconds, you might argue is not sufficiently interesting to sustain its full length, but that's a matter of opinion. And you get on this thing 12 different overtures, and they are delightful. Nice, pleasant, enjoyable music. And I recommend it on that basis, and also because we really get to hear a piece of musical history, an important piece of musical history that will fill in some gaps in your knowledge and in your understanding of how the great composers came to be. Rossini did not just pop up out of nowhere. He came from a long and illustrious school of operatic writing, and this is part of it. It really is. So if you love Rossini, you're going to want to hear some Cimarosa just to get a sense of his foundations. And they're very pleasing foundations because you don't get great stuff out of Drek to start with, right? So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.